Okay, hi. We are continuing our researcher interviews here as part of our Dogs and Children series. So today we are talking with Emily Rose, who's a lecturer at Staffordshire University in the UK. I should have asked you in advance for a little kind of biography to read, but I forgot that bit. So if you if you don't mind, do you just want to take a moment and kind of talk about what you do, why you're relevant here?
Okay, so I'm Dr. Sarah Rose. I'm a senior lecturer in psychology and child development, and I have an interest in understanding interaction between young children and their dogs. So yes, that led me to do some research in this area, which led me to have this conversation with you.
Awesome, perfect. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to be here. So we are doing this series looking at dogs and children because we know, as has been well established in the research, that dogs in homes with children are at an increased risk for relinquishment, as is there an increased safety risk associated with children with homes that dogs live in with children. And although no research has investigated this yet, we can probably deduce that there might also be potentially some dog welfare issues. So with that in mind, we are going to be chatting about some of your very interesting research in this field that has investigated some aspects associated with, safety risk directly, but probably also some welfare risk here as well. So I am just going to dive right in to talk about your research. So your research has investigated the ability of young children to interpret dogs' emotions. Correct? Have I messed that up in any way?
No, that's absolutely correct. So yeah, we had 4 to 5 year olds and 6 to 7 year olds. So 2 groups of relatively young children, and we showed them video clips and also still images. And for each clip, we asked them a little series of questions after showing them the image or the clip. And we were interested, just as you said, in their ability to identify how that dog might be feeling, its emotional state, and we had to make it really child friendly. So we talked about dogs being happy, playful. We talked about dogs being angry or aggressive, and we talked about dogs being frightened or scared. And we gave the children that sort of forced choice of those 3 emotions that the dog might be feeling. And then after we'd established how the child thought the dog was feeling, how confident they were that they were right about how the dog was feeling, we also asked them a small series of questions about whether they would approach that dog. So things like, would you go and sit next to that dog? Would you whisper your secrets to the dog? Would you hug the dog? Would you pat the dog? Would you brush the dog? So, trying to make it child friendly again, but also thinking about what they might see other people do to dogs. So we were interested in both their ability to recognize the emotion that the dog was displaying, but also their understanding or intention to then approach or not approach that dog.
Okay, and I don't need to get to the key findings yet. I just because we're gonna get there. But yeah, I just kind of you obviously summarized it very well. So with that in mind, what is the background to this research, and why did you feel that it was necessary to be conducted?
This is a little bit tangential. A lot of my research is actually about children's creativity and problem solving. But I was at a British Psychological Society developmental section conference, and there was a symposium on child-dog interaction. And I looked at the program and I thought, oh yeah, that's something that I'm really interested in. So I went to the symposium, and I was really interested to hear about some of the research that was being done by psychologists at that point in time, trying to really address this issue of, okay, having a pet, having a dog can be really beneficial for a child, but also increases the risk of the child getting bitten. And researchers were sort of looking at why that might be, what could be done about it. And from this symposium, I really took away two take-home messages. One was that there was research happening about children's ability to recognise a dog's emotional state, and that evidence was being found that sometimes children were struggling to recognise dogs that were feeling angry or displaying anger because they were seeing the teeth and thinking it was a smile. And I thought that's really interesting, just, thinking about the young children and the way that, it makes sense that they're making that misinterpretation. And then also another strand of research within that symposium was really portraying the fact that young children have very poor knowledge about how to behave safely and appropriately around dogs. But what I really took away from that symposium is these are two really important areas that we need to look at if we're going to think about children being able to keep themselves safe with dogs. But these two areas seem to be quite disconnected. They seem to all be looked at in separate research studies. And sometimes I just felt that the way the questions were being posed to the children, whether images were being used, videos were being used, it lacks some ecological validity. And, the tests of knowledge were sort of questionnaire based. There weren't actually pictures of dogs involved always in them and things. So it just felt that there was an opportunity really here for some research that looked at these two really important areas, but looked at them within the same study so that we could also make those kind of conclusions about whether if a child misunderstood the emotion, it might still affect the way that they thought they'd approach that dog or not, and things like that. So just, combining the two really seemed to have that greater real life application that, children aren't asked how they behave around dogs in real life. They aren't often actually asked how they think the dog is feeling in real life. But what happens in real life is they interact with dogs. So, okay, what can we find out about their intentions, how they think they would interact with various different images and video clips of dogs that we showed them?
It is quite interesting. I think a really nice kind of pulling together of different threads of research in the field, for sure. From the study, what do you think are the key findings or results?
The finding that was most clear and most important to me really was that children are as likely to approach a dog that is displaying signs of fear as they are to approach a dog that is appearing to be playful and happy. And they seem to have some awareness that you shouldn't approach angry dogs, but when it comes to dogs that either they have recognised correctly, accurately, as showing signs of fear, or dogs that they maybe haven't recognised accurately, but others have said show signs of fear. In both of those situations, they're as likely to approach that dog as a dog that they or others think is showing playful behaviour. And I think as a developmental psychologist, that finding just made lots of sense, because children often behave as they would want others to behave towards them. And for many frightened children, actually having close proximity with somebody else will make them feel safer. So they were transferring that kind of understanding. It felt like they were assuming that the dog felt like them, and they were, we found quite high, actually, well, compared to previous research, the children in our study were better at accurately recognising the emotional state of dogs. So the older group of children, the 6 to 7 year olds, about 3/4 of them actually had good accuracy and were correct in their recognising of the emotional state of the frightened dogs, whereas previous research had found that as a much lower figure. So from our research, children's ability to recognise the emotional state of the dog was okay. It was a little bit less good for frightened than for happy and angry, but the really clear take-home message is they intend to approach frightened dogs. And I'm no dog behavior expert, but if I think of, shepherd's ladder of aggression and, my own experiences, that frightened dog can so quickly move up that ladder and become that aggressive dog that may bite. So we just felt that this finding that young children had this very specific misunderstanding was really important to share, because when we're thinking about interventions to try and keep children safe and improve the welfare situation for the dog, if we can be really specific about, where are the issues? And this does seem to be a particular area where there is an issue, that when a dog is displaying signs of fear, children think that the appropriate thing to do is to try and approach, potentially comfort that dog. And we don't want to do that, really, do we?
No, we don't. So you covered so many important things. So in terms of, I guess a few kind of tangents that we can, spend a bit of time discussing. So kind of children's ability or children's wanting to go and comfort a dog. When you and I had spoken before, you brought up their development of theory of mind, which of course, well, this is you. When does that start? When does research show that starts to happen?
Yeah, so children's theory of mind is a concept that relates to their ability to understand how other people feel, but also what other people's desires might be. It's a complex cognitive development of the understanding, really, of others. People talk about as being able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. And we know that this ability develops in young children gradually from about the age of 3.5 to 4. We expect it to become better developed by about the age of 7, but there are still some aspects, in complex situations where it may still be developing. There has been a little bit of research done looking at children's kind of theory of mind of animals. Some of it's been done with stuffed toys, and again, I think, maybe this lacks a little bit of real world kind of application. And it's always really difficult in this area of research with children and animals, because we don't want to increase any welfare risks for the animals in making them take part in our research studies, and obviously we want to make sure that our child participants are not put at any risk either. So using stuffed animals, there is some indication that children will assign emotional states. So they have an understanding that animals have emotional states, etc., by the age of about 3. And we'd expect then that maybe by the age of 7, children are developing that understanding that, other people will have different desires than they will. So potentially they then might naturally be developing that understanding that what a dog needs, wants, what is appropriate for a dog in a particular situation might be different to what's appropriate for themselves. But I think there's also lots of evidence within developmental psychology. We know that individuals who are developing slightly neuroatypically, such as with individuals with autism, can really struggle with this concept of theory of mind. And there's various little training programs, interventions that have been developed, which have been shown to be really successful at training these children in their theory of mind development and awareness. So potentially there's opportunity there, because some of those training programs could potentially be adapted and used with younger, typically developing children who are growing up with dogs in their houses, to help keep them safe, really, so that it could become part of, the many sort of dog bite prevention programs that there already are, to train children that the dog will have different desires, responses in certain situations compared to those that the child might have.
Right. So I think we're going to circle back to kind of teaching tools in just a moment, but in terms of picking up on the thread of theory of mind, I think that obviously it's quite useful. It's a very important thing to have for children understanding humans, and I think that it's equally as important for animals. But it seems to me that where things just get a little bit murky, a little bit kind of wires get crossed, is yes, okay, this dog is frightened, but when I'm frightened, I want to be held, and I want comfort, and I want tactile comfort, and I want someone next to me. Well, a dog, when they're frightened, probably isn't going to want that same thing. And so that's where, to me, it seems to get a little bit messy, a little bit problematic.
Absolutely. And, the more complicated the message is, the harder it is sometimes for the child to understand them. And also, if we're thinking about, the role of parents in this, if many parents will not be aware of their child's misunderstanding about how you behave around a frightened dog, and how aware are parents of how you behave as well is also sometimes the challenge. Indeed. Maybe they may think, oh, my child is trying to comfort the dog, and they may therefore not intervene and stop that behavior, and it parents are often conflicted and pulled in different directions, because of course we want children to grow up to be kind and caring towards animals, but it's that understanding that what is kind and caring to animals is not always the same as what is kind and caring to another human being.
Indeed. So yes, I think that's a really key point. Okay. So then the big things, kind of the big takeaways from your research are, yes, we know children aren't probably so great at noticing and recognizing a fearful dog, but even when they are told the dog is fearful, they still are keen to go and help the dog with them.
Yeah, when they're told the dog is fearful, or when, our research specifically found when they think the dog is fearful, they've correctly, and we gave them a scale and they've said, this dog is really fearful, not just a bit fearful, but really fearful. They're then very likely to go on and say, yes, I would go and hug the dog, pat the dog, tell the dog my secret, sit next to the dog, and those questions that are measuring that intention to approach the dog. So that really was our key, I think our really important finding.
No, I definitely agree. And then one other kind of thing that you noted was, yes, you separated fear, and I think you called them angry dogs. Is that the term?
We did, yes. For the children, we called them angry.
Angry dogs. So yes, in the case of your study, those were two discrete groups. But from kind of a dog behavior perspective, we of course know that fear underpins a lot of what would be classified as angry. So what a scared dog one moment can a moment later turn into a dog that we would classify as angry, so could potentially harm a child due to many factors. But yes, and of course, one of the things that I was going to note here is, like you mentioned, the kind of behaviors that are associated with fear are often very subtle things that even adults are often not great at picking up on.
Absolutely. And there's been lots of research done, hasn't there? And I think it is always those fearful dogs, like you say, the behaviours are subtle, and whether we're looking at children or adults, it's that group that adults and children struggle to correctly identify. I think we found in our study that by age 6, 7, we were getting quite high correct recognition, even of the fearful dogs, with about 75% of children recognising them correctly. But I think that's also, we had still images in there as well as videos. One other finding that I haven't mentioned, but I think is also interesting, is that the younger children, the 4 or 5-year-olds, were better at recognising the still images, and actually they struggled quite a lot more with recognising the emotion that the dog was showing in the videos. And I think that does have some importance, because in real life, it's more like the video. There's lots of different things going on. There's maybe conflicting stimuli, and the videos, you could hear the sounds the dog was making as well as seeing their behaviour. So from an adult perspective, I thought, oh, it will be easier in the videos. But actually, for the very young children, it seemed harder in the videos. I think because of the number of different things that they were should I pay attention to this? Should I pay attention to that? Yeah. And of course, in real life, we're going to see even more of that. So I think I'm a little bit, although the children in our study had quite good recognition, I don't want us to assume that particularly young children are going to always have good recognition, because I think in real life, with lots of things going on around them, it's quite a different scenario, really, to being shown images and videos on a computer screen in a safe school classroom.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And then, also if it's their own dog, the excitement of their own dog, or they're visiting, a friend's dog, all the other kind of emotions that go along with in real life. So no, I think that's really important. Okay. So what do you think are the practical applications or implications for shelters and rehoming organizations based on the results of your research? So knowing the findings that you had, how can this be useful to rehoming organizations? Especially because we know research has found a lot of organizations are hesitant, if not totally unwilling, to rehome dogs to families with young children. So,
yeah, absolutely. And I think I can completely understand where that hesitancy comes from. And clearly, the research evidence it does suggest that there may be safety issues, and you talked about the relinquishment data as well. But I think what I'd hope this research shows is that children can behave appropriately, or at least show the potential to behave appropriately around dogs, because children in our research seem to have quite good understanding about approaching dogs that were showing clearly aggressive behavior. They seem to have quite good understanding about dogs that were playful, and that it was that they would have enjoyment, and all the benefits that we know that come with pet ownership. And I think that what our research does highlight is this particular issue around fearful dogs. Now, dogs that are being rehomed from shelters, some dogs may be more fearful than others. So maybe that's something that needs to be particularly taken into consideration when deciding which dogs are appropriate to go to homes with children, that dogs that show more fearful behaviour are maybe less appropriate for those homes. But also that maybe, and this isn't so maybe directly related to the rehoming organisations, but it's about the education aspect, I suppose. Educating children about how to behave around dogs, and particularly how to behave maybe around frightened dogs, but also educating parents. So parents are aware not only of their responsibility of supervision, etc., but they're aware of this particular area that children seem to have a misunderstanding, so that they can be particularly vigilant maybe for when the dog appears to be fearful. And we know that there are many well-tested, well-developed intervention programs out there for teaching adults, for teaching young children even how to recognize dogs' emotions or emotional states, so that with support, I'd like to think that some dogs that are suitable for rehoming to family situations. Okay. So, all right. So that definitely makes sense. Just being extra mindful of dogs that appear to be fearful. I mean, one thing that I kind of do need to note here is that, unfortunately, assessments of dogs in shelters are really not so helpful. Having said that, that's true of the assessment itself. However, there are lots of other ways that we can gather information about dogs before they're adopted. So behavioral histories, if they've been in a foster home. So we can gather information other ways. And I think the thing that comes to me here is, I think there's two things that need to be considered, isn't there? There's the dog and the dog's temperament and the dog's predispositions to behave in certain ways. But, maybe families should be assessed too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Because, some families are certainly going to be much more, I don't necessarily want to use the word knowledgeable, but aware maybe of how to behave around dogs. Some adults are going to have much better ability at recognizing a dog's emotional state. And I think that, I'm a psychologist, I'm a quantitative researcher. We look at averages, we look at statistics, but we know that behind those statistics, there is variability. So there is certainly within our studies, children who will have been very accurate at recognizing dogs' emotional state. And, we never got to a point where 100% of children were saying that they'd approach dogs. So there's children who also maybe within that have much better safety knowledge than other children. And so I think it's, being aware really of that variability, both within dogs, but also within families.
Children. No, I think you really hit the nail on the head. I mean, no, there is some rationale for rehoming organizations, like you said, being very mindful and very cautious of rehoming dogs to families with children. Having said that, there's also plenty of variability in children and in families and in circumstances. So perhaps having kind of these blanket policies aren't useful. And perhaps there are some really great homes that happen to have 4 and 5-year-olds that could make a really lovely home for a dog. So yeah, I think you've hit on some important points. And carrying on from that, what do you think are the practical applications or implications for dog adopters or owners based on the results of your research? And I'm sure there's probably a lot of overlap as there is for the organizations themselves, but is there anything else that you think is important here?
I think it does kind of relate back to really what I was just saying about that, developing the awareness within those adopters of dogs that children have this particular misunderstanding. I think that maybe traditionally adopters and people in general may have been quite aware of children and dogs that are really showing aggressive behavior and making sure children don't approach those dogs. But I think that maybe this is a slightly grayer area where adopters are also maybe less clear about the dog's emotional state and maybe also are less clear about the importance of respecting that emotional state of a fearful dog. And, a fearful person, person who's feeling anxiety can become an angry person. That is one of the ways that, humans also can express their anxiety. But it's different to how it is in dogs. And I'm no dog behaviorist, but I'm sure that there is work there that could be done to educate potential adopters, about how quickly a fearful dog can become an aggressive, defensive dog. Because I think that, again, that's an area that maybe adults as well as children are a little bit less aware of, because it is different to how maybe you'd expect a person to behave in that situation, so that maybe we're a bit more respectful of those fearful dogs and a bit more understanding that it's important to give those fearful dogs what they need, space. What they need,
which is often space. So I think that's really well put. How do we teach children and adults to give dogs what they need and to respect their emotions at that time?
I think it is about respecting those emotions, particularly when it's in that grey, what can be seen as a grey area of the fearful dog. Because I think that there is, there's widespread understanding about how to behave and not behave around an angry dog, but I'm not sure we've got that same level of widespread understanding about how to behave around the fearful dog. And certainly our research suggests that children in particular have a misunderstanding about how to behave around the fearful dog. You should offer them comfort, which is just the opposite.
I think you're right. And kind of to that point, and I think this all kind of fits in. There's research that's found that a lot of dog bites occur actually from what are classified as benign interactions. So not that this is appropriate, but not that the child is, or anyone is hitting the dog or standing on the dog, whatever, but is maybe just trying to cuddle with the dog or doing things that we consider, kind and benign, but they're kind and benign for us, but that might not be so for a dog. And if you have a dog who's fearful and now you're doing something that they're really not fond of, then understandably that could lead to a really unfortunate outcome.
And this is, where I think like future research, I think I'd be really excited to look at some of the theory of mind interventions that have been developed within child development, but obviously completely changing them and adapting them, but using the principles to try and develop that understanding that dogs don't think like people. They have a different desires, different needs to us, and I think that there's potential for that, those principles and those interventions to be used for children, but also for adults, particularly potential adopters who may be taking on a rescue dog.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. That dogs experience the world differently than we do as humans. So no, I think you've hit the nail on the head. And actually that segues really nicely into my next question, which is, based on your research, what do you think are the most useful directions for future research? So you mentioned theory of mind.
Yeah, so I think there's loads of interventions that have been developed that have been shown to be beneficial for developing children's safety knowledge, developing children's ability to recognise a dog's emotional state. But I think there's still really room for improvement in that area, and also room for improvement of the way we evaluate those interventions. So this is becomes maybe a bit research methody, but there's an argument that over time, and indeed in our research, we found that over time, children's ability to recognise the emotional state and their kind of ability to demonstrate they intend to behave in a somewhat appropriate way, those things increase. So we need to be careful when we're looking at evaluation interventions and we're evaluating them, that we're not just saying, oh, look, this made a difference. Children got better over time, because children get better over time. Anyway, there are some really interesting interventions that have been developed. And there is some research that's been published that's evaluating those interventions. But some of that research maybe isn't as thorough as I would like it to be from a child development perspective. And I think that it really needs a collaborative research team, a team that has really good understanding of how do you evaluate interventions, a team that has expertise in dog behaviour, dog welfare, etc., and really can put things forward from the dog's perspective, and real expertise in child development, so that we know how to design those interventions in a way that is going to be appropriate for the children, that is going to really increase the chances of the intervention working. So you're using the knowledge that we have, for example, in child development of theory of mind, of the successful interventions that have been developed in that area. So really, bringing together that very multidisciplinary team. And I think sometimes, this research tends to be led by people who are experts in one of those areas, lacks that real collaboration between experts in the different areas. So I think that's, and then, there's loads of really important work that's happening where, charities have just sort of developed their own interventions and they've tried to take the best bits from different things, but it feels a bit guesswork. And I suppose as a researcher, that's an area where I really feel there is potential for us to work together, really to improve the welfare of the dogs, so they're getting the experiences that they need. Because, if we improve, my belief is if we improve the welfare of the dogs, then we also are improving the safety of the children.
No, yes, I agree. And that's, if at the beginning I kind of led in with saying, we know about safety risks, we know about relinquishment risks. We don't know, there's a lack of research looking into welfare, but we can probably assume that if these other things aren't going well, that probably their welfare isn't great, whether it's their short-term welfare and those kind of snippets of time, or whether it's their overall welfare. It's hard to say. But no, I think that it's logical to assume that there's a relationship between those things. So yeah. Okay. My last question. So since and we've kind of talked on this throughout, so I'm sorry. But I do think you, from our previous conversations, have some really important insights. Since you are a researcher in developmental psychology, how can we best teach children about appropriate dog-child interactions and safe behavior around dogs? And you when we spoke before, had brought up some really important points about how children best learn, young children best learn.
Young children learn best when we tell them what they should do rather than what they shouldn't do. And often as adults, it's almost more natural to say, stop, don't. But actually, research evidence suggests that if we can try and change our language and encourage children to do something, they tend to demonstrate the behaviours that we're asking them to do much more quickly and much more consistently, because children do push boundaries. And again, this can depend a lot. Dogs have different temperaments. Children also have very different temperaments. So some children are very law-abiding, if you like. And if you say don't do something, they won't do it. But clearly there's other children who do push those boundaries. And parents often talk about their frustrations with this. But there is really clear evidence that if we give instructions that are much more positively framed, do this. So rather than saying, don't hug the dog, maybe we could rephrase that to, let's give the dog some space. And thinking about that language, just the way we're presenting it to the children and trying to make it an action. They're much better at doing things than not doing things. Tell the child to sit still. It's not very productive, is it? They want to move. They want to do things. So yeah, I think there's really clear evidence there that telling children what to do will bring about the behaviours that we want more consistently than if we phrase it in a more negative way. There is evidence, thinking again about sort of training and trying to increase children's awareness. Children learn best through interaction with others rather than through watching something on the screen, for example. So I know that there have been some interventions that have, been delivered, recordings, etc., that children can then watch. And that's fine, but really to make those most effective, we need some interaction while they're watching. So talking about it even with their parents, that type of thing, encouraging that interaction. Children learn from others by talking to others, by interacting with others. And of course, they do also learn by what they see. So they will model their behaviour on the behaviours of others. So again, I suppose it's parents, they're being mindful and thinking about, how they are behaving around the dog, and to not behave in ways that they wouldn't want their child to behave around the dog.
Yeah, no, I think you've hit on some really important things. I find the study fascinating. And yeah, I think it's a really interesting bit of research. Well, from a researcher perspective, but all of the implications that we discussed, I think are really important.
I've really enjoyed the opportunity to talk about the research again with you. And it would be lovely to have the opportunity in the future maybe to be involved in more research in this area. As I say, it's a little bit of a tangent to my main research, looking at creativity and problem solving. But in many ways, deciding how to behave around a dog is kind of a problem solving situation. So...
No, indeed. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to chat with us and share your knowledge from your perspective. And yeah, we appreciate the time.